The Girl Scouts Canoe Trip. If you enjoy my reading you these books, please give me a thumbs up on YouTube or share my podcast with a friend. Thanks so much. Chapter 4. The First Encampment. You made your landings rather well, remarked Miss Phillips, as the girls pulled her canoe upon the shore. I think you won't have much difficulty in passing that part of the sailor's test. Now, Captain, where do we go from here? Asked Ethel. Miss Phillips looked about her, and seeing a small clearing about 25 yards from the landing place, she said, "Let's go over there, in that open place. That looks like a good camping ground." "Then we won't have to chop any trees down," remarked Ruth lightly. "Well, that's a relief." "It surely is," laughed Alice. "My arms are stiff already." They commenced unloading the canoe, and when they had everything out, they pulled them higher upon the bank and turned them upside down, and then shouldering the luggage, they carried it to the clearing, making several trips. "Phew, what a load!" gasped Ruth, as she dropped the last of her equipment to the ground. "And yet you know that it was only the necessities," said Miss Phillips, who overheard the exclamation. "Now you can understand why I warned you not to bring any superfluous things." "Well, I'm glad I didn't," answered Ruth. "When do we eat? Where's the cook?" "We'll put up the tents first while it's light. That's the reason I wanted to make camp early today," said the captain. "The tents are new to you. Then Frida will start to prepare the supper, and Ruth, since you are in such a hurry, you may be her assistant for tonight and gather wood. Keep up the fire and help her in any way you can. Now, everyone put the bundles of food and general supplies in one pile over there, so that I can cover it with a rubber tarp, which I brought along for that purpose. We'll put up the tent in a line over here facing the east. Get out your tents, girls." "They looked awfully small," commented Doris, weighing hers in her hand. "That is because they are so light," answered the captain. "They are made of a kind of silk, but they will turn water and really afford adequate protection on a trip like this. An experienced canoeist recommended them, and when they are up, you will find them more roomy than you think." With Frida's help, she proceeded to raise her own tent and then Frida's next to it. The girls watched the process with intense interest, and then, without difficulty, each pair of canoe mates erected their own. Each tent had a floor covering of the same material as the tent, which was sewed on for protection against mosquitoes and other insects. Miss Phillips showed them how to put up their mosquito netting most conveniently, and how to arrange their equipment so as to leave in the tent a maximum of space for them to move about in. And around each tent they dug shallow gutters of trenches to drain off the water if it rained. "Now that the tents are up, the hardest part of work is over," said Miss Phillips. "It took comparatively long this time, but after you become used to it and know just how to proceed, you'll find that you can put one up and take it down in half the time. I think we'll get our beds ready. We won't have any difficulty in filling our bed sacks here." The bed sacks consisted of flat canvas bags, open at one end and long and wide enough for one person to lie on. The girls wandered about gathering dry leaves with which to fill them, and then arranged their beds for the night. Although they had been camping before, they had experienced nothing so primitive as this. Before they had found their tents already set up, proved with wood fires and folding cots, and they had prepared their meals on a camp stove, but they liked the primitiveness of this new experience. To many of them, the prospect of the evening seemed best of all. Frida busied herself in the preparation of supper, with Ruth as assistant, but she also found many other willing hands to help. These scouts enjoyed the well-cooked, substantial meal, which they literally devoured. They were so ravenous. Then, after things were cleared away and the fire was built up to a blaze, they established themselves comfortably around it. "If anybody gets homesick," remarked Ethel, "I'm going to shake them." "Oh, nobody will," said Marjorie. "We're too happy for that." "No, I promise I won't either," said Alice Endicott. "Remember how homesick I was last year at school?" "I certainly do remember," replied Marjorie. "It was all our faults, too. But there won't be any more homesick girls next year." "No, I mean to do my share, too," added Alice. "Girls," began Miss Phillips, interrupting the conversation and changing the subject, "I have a new lieutenant for you." "Good! Who is she?" "Maybe not so good," said Ruth. "Tell us quick." "Guess." "A teacher?" asked Marjorie. "No." "Not Edith Evans back again," suggested Lily hopefully. "No, I won't keep you in suspense any longer. Frances Wright has successfully passed the lieutenant's test, and since she was 18 the first of this month, she has received the commission. The day that we stopped to take the sailor test, I thought we would have a formal meeting in the evening and install her in office." The congratulations that followed assured the captain that she had not made a mistake in her choice. It was around 9 o'clock when the fire died down and the conversation commenced to lag, and they all voted that they were ready to go to bed. The strange croaking of the frog, the hum of the insects, the distant ripple of the flowing water, and the breeze now and then moving the branches of the trees were the only sounds that broke the stillness of the woods. Tired, happy, and at peace with the world, the girls crept into their tents, and with their blankets wrapped around them, soon fell fast asleep. Chapter 5. The By-Stream. The experience of a canoe trip are sometimes more interesting than those of any other kind of outdoors excursion, for there are not only the alternate pleasures of traveling by water and of camping on land, but there is the added joy of awakening each morning to find a new world about you. When the girls had pulled their canoes upon the bank the preceding afternoon and had busied themselves with unpacking and the erection of the tents, they had hardly realized how beautiful the spot of their encampment was. Now, as they beheld it from their tents in the sunrise, they were deeply impressed. Marjorie was so eager to make the picture a permanent one that she got out her camera before she was fully dressed and took a snapshot. "Marge, you're so energetic," yawned Doris, who was still buried under her blankets. "Probably that's why you get all the prizes that are going. And I do believe you'll get this one, too," she added. "Not if Ruth Henry knows it," answered Marjorie. "Do we swim before breakfast?" asked Doris, changing the subject hastily. "Or do we get dressed right away in the rest of our clothing?" "I don't think there are any rules set," replied her companions. "You can do as you please, I guess. But I thought I'd just wash and run down and see if I might help Frida." Already the girls in their other tents were stirring, although there had not been a bugle call to awaken them. When Lily Andrews opened her eyes and casually looked at her companion's bed, she received a shock to see Ruth Henry sitting on the edge, lacing up her shoes. She and Marjorie had roomed together for so long it seemed strange to have another girl as partner. "Hello, Lily," greeted Ruth. "Have a nice sleep?" "Yes, but wasn't it cold, though? I think it was worse than at camp." "I suppose that it's because we are so close to the water," remarked Ruth. Lily reached for her mirror and brush and comb, and then proceeded to arrange her hair, sitting up where she was in bed. Ruth watched her admiringly. Lily was not pretty, but there was something very attractive about her. And Ruth could not forget the fact that she was the sophomore president, or rather had been, for the year was over now. But the holder of that much-desired office would always seem great in her eyes. "Aren't you going to wear sneaks?" asked Lily, interrupting the other girl's reverie. "No, I thought I'd put on my high shoes on today." She lifted the flap and peered out of the tent. Not far away she beheld a bright fire, and Frida Hammer bending over it, busily cooking. "I smell breakfast," she said. "The cook's on the job." "Poor Frida," sighed Lily. "I wouldn't want to have to get up so early as she has to." "She gets paid for it," replied Ruth, who never believed in wasting sympathy where she did not consider it was warranted. "Say, Lil," she continued, as she proceeded to manicure her nails while waiting for the others, "have you ever been to Silverton?" "Never. Papa and Mamma often talked of going, but it's so hard to get a house, and you know there are no hotels." "There aren't? Then who do you suppose could possibly be providing for this trip?" "He certainly must be a swell." "I haven't the slightest idea," replied Lily, "though I confess I've thought and thought. Papa knows some awfully rich men in New York. I've wondered whether any of them could have become interested in our troop, and the general idea of Girl Scouts. It's a perfect thing to do, isn't it?" "Yes, because he didn't just give it to us. We felt we earned it, if by passing that pioneer test, and believe me, we did." "And wasn't it just the wisest thing to select that one? Look how much we've used the knowledge already, putting up tents and chopping logs and digging holes." The girls quickly put the finishing touches on their toilettes and hurried down to the stream to wash. In a few minutes they joined the other 8 campers, all seated around Frida's fire. "What have you got for us this morning, Frida?" asked Marjorie pleasantly. "Prunes first," she announced. "Ugh!" cried Ruth. "I hate them." "Ruth," reproved Miss Phillips, "remember, we all agree to be pleased with whatever we have, which means whatever was easiest to carry." "Oh, I beg your most humble pardon, cook," apologized the girl with mock solemnity, and then she proceeded to eat 1 prune. "Say, that reminds me," remarked Ethel. "I hope our cook doesn't turn out like the cook on board the ship in Treasure Island." "What was she like?" asked Frida. "It wasn't she, Frida," laughed Marjorie, who had already read all of her brother's books, among which Treasure Island was a favorite. "It was a man, and a regular villain, too. He was a pirate." Frida Hammer, still sensitive over the wrong she had committed the preceding fall by running away in Marjorie's canoe, blushed guiltily. Miss Phillips noticed her embarrassment, immediately hastened to change the subject. "We must make a quick pack, girls, and get away as soon as possible. I want to reach Silverton by Saturday night, and next week, you know, if we can. That will give us 3 good days to rest before the water meet, and I think we shall need it." "Miss Phillips," inquired Ruth, "is this meet just for scouts, or will there be any young people from Silverton competing?" "Only Pansy Troop members," she replied, "for such are your benefactor's wishes. But I think from the way he spoke, he will send the winner of our meet back in August for their annual affair." The whole plan gave Ruth a thrill of pleasure, but she realized it was not an unmitigated joy. Marjorie was still so much more skillful than any of the other scouts that Ruth despaired of winning, and to her chagrin, Frida Hammer seemed to rank second. Moreover, she knew that the latter would of course be allowed to compete, although the idea of that crude country girl among the social celebrities of Silverton seemed to Ruth utterly preposterous. "Captain," she asked, "won't you please tell us all about the meet? I mean the events in it, so that we'll have a chance to prepare for it." "Certainly, Ruth," replied Miss Phillips, "but I can't now because I don't want to take the time. But if you will remind me this evening, after we are all settled and our work is done, I would be glad to go into details." Their conversation was interrupted by the appearance of 2 covered pans, which Frida drew from the vicinity of the fire. One was piled high with hot cakes, while the other held the fish which they had caught, and which were now fried to a tempting brown. "This surely makes up for the prunes, Frida," cried Ruth enthusiastically. "You certainly are a dandy." The girls ate hungrily until every hot cake had disappeared and there was nothing left of the fish but bones. "I declare I can't budge an inch after all that food," announced Doris, making a great effort to stand up. The bearing of refuse, taking down of tents, and packing was accomplished in a comparatively short time. Miss Phillips realized that the girls were becoming more expert. Ruth, however, was only conscious of the fact that her arms ached and her shoulders were stiff from that previous day's exercise. Was this, she wondered, because she paddled awkwardly? Neither Marjorie nor Frida seemed in the least bit stiff. The idea worried her. It meant not only that she would not be able to go fast that day, but she feared that a continued strain might seriously incapacitate her for the meet. But Ruth Henry had no intention of admitting her disability. It was her nature rather to gain her desire by cunning. Accordingly, she decided that this would be an opportunity for a delay. Fortunately for her, Miss Phillips bade her canoe take the lead. "Keep your maps handy," she said, "and try not to make any mistakes." So she paddled quietly ahead for some distance, as long as the stream continued narrow. When she finally saw signs of its widening, and thus affording an opportunity for her to lose the course, she began what she hoped would prove an intensely interesting conversation. "Now that it's quiet enough for everybody to hear you, Captain Phillips," she called, "won't you please tell us all about Silverton?" The girls in the other canoes paddled closer, so to listen. "Well, I've never been there myself," answered the captain, "so I can't tell you very much about it, only what I've heard and read. As far as I know, it's almost an island, the river on one side and the lake on the other. It's very beautiful, I understand, lovely tall trees and shady walks, and the houses, which are all occupied only during the summer, are absolutely gorgeous. The whole place contains only about 1,000 people, including the servants, and since there is no hotel of any description, practically everybody knows everybody else." "And do you suppose they know about us?" pursued Ruth. "They must by this time, for our friend secured this house almost 6 months ago in advance. He was very lucky about it, too. It seems that it belonged to a wealthy New York man whom he knows in a business way, and this man takes a yachting cruise each summer during July, so our friend was able to lease it." "Have you any idea how much it cost?" was Ruth's next question. "Not a cent under $2,000, replied Miss Phillips, "and maybe more. It's a wonderful house, and there's such a demand for places at Silverton that an owner can get almost anything he asks. But I understand they won't lease to undesirable people." "That's a big compliment to the Girl Scouts, isn't it?" remarked Ruth, swelling with pride. "Yes, and to the man who is paying for it." "And now tell us about the house," suggested Ruth. By this time the stream had greatly widened, until it appeared almost the proportions of a lake. The water was quiet. Water lilies grew here and there on the surface. The high, sharp banks with their overhanging trees had vanished. The sun poured brightly down upon their heads. "We could almost sail here, if we had brought sails," remarked Miss Phillips, before she answered Ruth's question. "Sailing in a canoe is lots of fun." "Oh, I'd love it," cried Marjorie. "Tell us how you do it." "No, Captain, please answer Ruth's question first," put in Florence Evans. She, too, was anxious to hear all about the summer resort. "I really can't tell you much," replied Miss Phillips, "except that the house is huge and has so many rooms you can hardly count them. There are lots of swings, too, and tennis court, and we are to have 2 cars at our disposal. We'll all have to wait and see for ourselves, I guess," she concluded, "for I could never do it justice." "But, Captain," objected Ethel, "it will take all our time to take care of a house like that. We'll never be able to do anything else." But again Miss Phillips smiled. "There will be servants to take care of that," she explained. "The same servants who run the place during August." All this time, Ruth had been studiously avoiding the stream, which she knew to be the right one. Instead, she followed a little tributary which was becoming narrower and shallower. "Are you sure we are right, Ruth?" questioned Miss Phillips, reaching into her pocket for her map. "This stream looks as if it were going to come to an end." Ruth stopped paddling and balanced her paddles across her lap, while she too consulted her map. "If I did miss the main stream," she began, "I can't imagine where." But her remarks were interrupted by a sharp scream from Alice. "I'm stuck in the mud!" she shrieked. "I can't budge the canoe an inch." By this time all the canoes were in extremely shallow water, no longer clear like the swifter stream which they had been following, but so clouded by mud that the exact depth was undeterminable. Tall grass grew here and there, and farther along the water gave almost the appearance of a field. The girls needed no reference to the map now to establish the fact that they were lost. Ruth apologized profusely, lightly blaming Miss Phillips for absorbing her interest in what she was saying. In the meantime, Marjorie had turned her canoe around so that Doris could reach out her hand and take hold of the stern of Alice's canoe. It was only a few seconds before they too were turned about, and all were paddling in the direction from which they had just come. "We'll go back as quickly as we can," said Miss Phillips, glancing at her watch. It was already 3 o'clock. Ruth paddled swiftly now, realizing that her shoulders were no longer stiff, but in better condition to take up the exercise. "Here's the place," cried Miss Phillips, after about an hour of paddling. "But just think how much time we've lost." "But we are having a good time," put in Ruth, as it was evident that she was not in the least remorseful over her mistake. "But we'll have to camp here," answered the captain sharply, "and if you know of what is awaiting you at Silverton, you wouldn't want to lose a single minute more than necessary."